In the gospel today, a scribe approaches Jesus with this question: which is the first of all the commandments? Now, kind of in that century or so leading up to that day, this was kind of a common thing that Jewish rabbis would have just debated. It was just a theological conversation, because we think of the commandments as the Ten Commandments, but within the Old Testament, within Judaism, there's 600 laws of God. There's over 613. So there's a lot of commandments, and so there was a kind of a debate. You kind of like could measure up a rabbi and what you thought of him based on what his answer was to that question, which is the first of all the commandments. You kind of get a sense of kind of what his approach was to the scriptures and to the Lord. And I would say at about the time of Jesus, though, there was pretty good agreement that this particular thing that Jesus said, this was the first of the commandments, which we actually heard in the first reading as well. It comes from Deuteronomy. Hear then, Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Take to heart these words which I enjoin on you today. Most rabbis at the time would have considered that to be, this is the kind of a summary of all the commandments, a summary of kind of a Jewish faith. In a way, it became a prayer. They call it the Shema. Jews pray it today still. In fact, it's been tradition for a long time for that passage to be written on a little scroll and put inside of a box and put right at the entry of a doorway. So if you've ever seen it at a Jewish household, there's a little thing on the inside of the doorway. If you've watched The Chosen, they do it sometimes where they'll kiss it as they walk into the house. It was a very normal thing, that particular prayer. It's a prayer. It's a confession of faith, kind of like what we do in the middle of Mass. We profess our faith together. It's also a prayer at the same time. So to love God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, that's a summary of the faith. Basically, it's to say the most important commandment is to love God with all of yourself, with your entire being. But then Jesus answers what wasn't even a question. He says, well, the second most important commandment is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Like, to those two things together, that is an expression of the Ten Commandments beautifully. The first three commandments are about loving God. The last 7 commandments are about loving your neighbor. And then all of the commandments from God, those two things sum them all up really beautifully. And the fact that Jesus holds them together side by side seems to imply that you have to have both to do it right at all. In a way, if you're not loving your neighbor well, you're not really loving God. As much as you might think you are, you might even spending time in prayer, if you're not actually loving your neighbor, you're not loving God enough because you're not obeying him. And vice versa. I can't truly love my neighbor, maybe, if I don't love God first, because the Lord reveals to me things about the human person, right, made in God's image and likeness, for example. So when I have a relationship with God, I can see the fullness of the human person and love my brother or sister appropriately. So as Christians, we're called to hold those two things together. And that should impact everything about our life. It should impact the kind of TV shows we watch, the way we spend our money, the way we spend our free time, who our friends are, the way that we talk, all sorts of things. If we're loving God with our whole being and we're loving our neighbor as much as we love ourselves, that should impact everything that we do. Even politics, right? We're just a few days away from election. It should impact the way that we vote. Now, half of you have already voted according to the state, right? Most of us have done mail-in ballots at this point. But as we approach issues, as we approach candidates, we're doing it with these two things in mind. A couple weeks ago, you heard me preach on Amendment 79. Archbishop just asked for one more reminder in homilies this weekend. Very briefly, the church has teaching authority and reminds us that it has infallible authority when it comes to teachings on faith and morals. And we have a particular amendment on our ballots this year, Amendment 79, that doesn't actually change too much in terms of abortion in our state. Abortion will still be allowed to the day of birth, just like 6 other states. But that particular amendment wants to allow taxpayer money to go towards abortions, and it wants to remove parents from the conversation whenever a minor is in a crisis pregnancy, wanting the minor to be able to make the decision without mom and dad even being a part of the conversation. So Archbishop is reminding us that's not truly loving our neighbor. It's not truly loving women. It's not truly loving the men impacted by abortion. And it's not truly loving the vulnerable child within the woman. So The Archbishop's just reminding us, as we apply our faith to the ballots this year, we need to look at Amendment 79 and make sure that we're voting no on that. I found myself, recently I made a YouTube video, some of you saw it, on the awkwardness of being a priest and preaching during a political season. And so I actually asked a bunch of my brother priests about their experiences of doing this exact thing that I'm doing. And it was interesting because there was so much consistency on the things that we struggle with, things we like about it, things we don't like about it. And one priest said something that was really profound to me. He said, I have people in my pews who swear that if we don't vote for so-and-so, or if we have to vote for so-and-so because that's the only thing that's going to save our country. He says, I got people on the other side of the aisle saying the exact same thing. You have to vote for so-and-so in order to save the country. And he said to me, but if we don't start loving God with our whole being, then it's not going to matter who we vote for. We're in trouble. Yeah, I think he's right. As much as, yes, the election's important and who we vote for is going to be important, the thing that our country desperately needs, the thing that's going to save our country, is if Christians start living this, loving God with our whole heart, loving our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. That has to impact everything that we are, everything that we do. That's going to be the thing that changes hearts. That's going to be the thing that changes our country. That's going to be the thing that saves our nation.